Irritable bowel syndrome, also called IBS, is a disorder of gut-brain interaction that is broken down into subtypes based off of someone's primary bowel habits. So that could be constipation, diarrhea, a mixture of both, etc. So today we're going to be talking about the diarrhea subtype of IBS called IBS D. And I just want to throw this out there very quickly that IBS D symptoms can overlap with several other conditions that are totally different from IBS. So if you do not have an IBS D diagnosis and you've been experiencing suspicious GI symptoms like chronic diarrhea, for instance, then definitely touch base with your medical provider because you want to make sure that you are clear on your diagnosis, because that's going to make a huge difference for how you're treating whatever kind of symptoms that you have going on. Now, that being said, our goal here today is just to talk about the different signs and symptoms of IBS D. So to do that, we're going to talk about the symptom requirements that are necessary in order to be diagnosed and subtype as having IBS D. And then we're going to be talking about different things that you can do to assist your medical provider in pinning down the right diagnosis. And then finally, we're going to talk about some different symptom complaints that are common in IBS D. So how is IBS D diagnosed and subtyped? I think the first thing that should be known is that IBS in general is diagnosed using symptom criteria, and those symptom criteria come to us from an organization called the Rome Foundation, the latest being the Rome 4 criteria. So in order to have IBS D, you first have to qualify for an IBS diagnosis. And in order to qualify for that base IBS diagnosis, you have to have recurrent abdominal pain on average at least 1 day per week in the last 3 months associated with 2 or more of the following criteria: related to defecation, associated with a change in frequency of stool, or associated with a change in form or appearance of stool. And these criteria have to be fulfilled for the last 3 months with onset of at least 6 months prior to being given a diagnosis of IBS. So basically, an IBS diagnosis is dependent on there being 2 core features, including abdominal pain and some form of altered bowel habits. And as the name would suggest for IBS D, that form of altered bowel habit would be diarrhea. Now, how do we go from having that base IBS diagnosis to getting that IBS D classification? So subtyping with any IBS subtype is based on predominant bowel habits, based off of days where you have an abnormal bowel movement. Now, how do we know what's an abnormal bowel movement? For that, we use this tool called the Bristol Stool Form Scale, which is basically this tool that shows 7 different images of stool and gives them a numerical ranking so that we can ascribe them as either being diarrhea, constipation, or normal. So stool forms 1 and 2 are considered constipation, whereas stool forms 6 and 7 are considered diarrhea. So the criteria to be subtype with IBS D is that greater than 25% of bowel movements should be a type 6 or 7 on the Bristol Stool Form Scale, and less than 25% of your bowel movements should be a type 1 or 2 on the Bristol Stool Form Scale. But alternatively, if you haven't had that kind of record keeping to sort out all of that, then you might simply just report to your physician that you predominantly are experiencing diarrhea or types 6 or 7 on the Bristol Stool Form Scale to be diagnosed with IBS D. Now, just a quick reminder, subtyping is based off of days where there has been an abnormal bowel movement that occurred. And to most accurately subtype someone's IBS type, you need at least 4 days of abnormal bowel movements in a month.
Before we continue, I want to quickly tell you about ibsprobiotics.org. So this started out as a research project, but then we ended up turning it into this really cool comparison tool. When you go on the site, you can easily compare which probiotics were most effective for different IBS symptoms, all exclusively based off of clinical studies. In fact, we spent the past 2 years building it, having analyzed over 50 different probiotics across more than 75 placebo-controlled trials. And the results surprised us. For example, we found that some really popular probiotics were nowhere near as effective as some lesser-known options, and there were even some probiotics that seemed to do more harm than good. So I hope this free tool helps you to cut through the marketing hype and saves you a ton of time when evaluating a probiotic.
When it comes to things that you can do on your end to help your medical provider pin down the right diagnosis of IBS D, I think the best thing is really good record keeping. And what I mean by that is that you could keep things like a stool diary, for instance, for 2 weeks, just taking note of all of your bowel movements, their form, etc. This can help with subtyping. I think another thing that's really helpful is keeping a food diary. And if you're fortunate, you may even have the opportunity to have a registered dietitian that specializes in this area take a look at that and see if there may be anything going on there that is indicative of possibly there being some kind of food intolerance that could be provoking diarrhea symptoms. Other things to take note of might be things like your stress levels or even your menstrual cycle if you are someone who has a menstrual cycle. These are all factors that could potentially play into GI symptoms. And another thing that would be ideal is if you are able to not be on any sort of stool-altering medications while you're keeping these logs, because that could be something that could potentially alter the data in a way where it would be harder to pin down the right diagnosis. Now, when it comes to the signs and symptoms of IBS D, we've done a more comprehensive IBS general symptoms overview in another video. I'll be sure to link that down below. But for IBS D in particular, there was a study that was done in 2019 that had over 1,500 IBS D participants. And this study found that the most common IBS D symptoms included that core feature of abdominal pain, which everyone with IBS would have, loose watery stools, cramping, frequency of bowel movements, urgency with bowel movements, bloating, and then less often, they also noted some bowel incontinence. Now, over half of the IBS D participants in this study reported that their gastrointestinal symptoms were extremely bothersome, with an additional 37% reporting that their symptoms were at least somewhat bothersome to them. So clearly, when it comes to IBS D, it is not some minor annoyance. In many cases, it can be quite debilitating and challenging to manage. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, features of IBS D can overlap with symptoms from so many different disease states. And so there are different red flag symptoms to be aware of that are not typically signs of IBS D. That can be things like nocturnal bowel movements, so going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, or things like having really persistent watery diarrhea where you're having greater than 4 episodes per day on a routine basis. We talk about different red flag features in a separate video that I will link down below, but definitely keep in mind that there are certain features that are not signs of IBS. You're going to want to check out that video to see if you have any of those going on. And if you do, be sure to touch base with your medical provider to discuss those symptoms. And that's all I have for you guys about the IBS D subtype. So if you feel comfortable sharing in the comment section, let us know what the signs and symptoms were that you were experiencing prior to getting that diagnosis. We would love to hear from you.
Thanks for watching this video. And as a quick reminder, don't forget to check out ibsprobiotics.org. We're really proud of this research project turned comparison tool that we've made. And of course, it is free and publicly available. And if you want to keep up to date with the latest IBS research, you can follow me here. See you next time.